Hey y'all, I'm back with another video in my Why Do I Love It series, and today I'm going to be talking about 86. This is a series that's gotten a lot of critical acclaim in the anime community, and quite frankly, in my opinion, is one of the best light novel to anime adaptations that exists out of the series that I've had the pleasure of reading the light novel for, and then seeing an anime for it. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about this one today and why I like it, and some of the reasons why I think other people might like it as well. So in the event that you've heard of it before or that you haven't, I'm here to give you a push into watching or reading the series. I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler free as possible, but quite frankly, no promises because it is very hard to talk about what I like in the series without spoiling anything. So you've been warned, but without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so 86 is a military sci-fi series that follows Spearhead Squadron and their commander Lena as they fight in this war against an unending tide of robots called the Legion. And basically the series is called 86 because the Republic of San Magnolia, which is one of the factions in the story, took all of the racial and ethnic minorities within their borders and put them in camps in the 86th district of the Republic, and basically legally stripped them of their human rights and human identity, and then forced them into military service fighting in these mechs that are quite frankly shoddily put together and have no consideration for their safety whatsoever against an enemy that is very technologically advanced and has no qualms about just killing in cold blood. So basically, they put them in this situation to whittle them down and basically essentially exterminate them. And basically, Spearhead Squadron in the story is comprised of these 86, whereas Lena herself is an Alba, so she is a member of the privileged class of the Republic of San Magnolia, so she does not live in the 86th district. She's not from there, and she basically commands Spearhead from far away. But she herself does believe that the 86 are people because that's basically what her father taught her, and her whole upbringing is these are people, this whole system is wrong. And the story basically really tackles the reality of war, how foolish and stupid discrimination is, what it looks like to be have a savior complex, and then go from that to being a true ally, and then what self-determination looks like for people who have had everything stripped from them, their identity, their possessions, their sense of self, who they are, basically, and what that looks like. And those are the things that I really like about it. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of the things that 86 does well, especially in Volume 1 and the first half of Season 1, which is what covers Volume 1, is tackle the reality of war, especially for child soldiers and people who are forced to deal with that violence on a daily basis. I have it written here in my notes to mention that, as I said, they put all the 86 in the 86th district and forced them to fight in waves, basically against the Legion. And by the time the story takes place, all the adults that had been placed in the district, because there were whole families and people who had immigrated from other countries that ended up here that then were placed in the district when the war started. By the time the story starts, the adults are basically all gone. There's not really any of them left. So the only people left fighting are the kids, basically. So the kids are the ones getting in these mechs, piloting them against these really cold, ruthless machines that really have no qualms about killing them without any sort of second thought. And as I mentioned here, Karena is the youngest member of Spearhead Squadron, and she is only 15 years old. So she's been seeing the horrors of war her entire life. Not to mention that her family was killed in front of her by Republic soldiers, and then her sister basically went off to fight when they were placed in the district, and she lost her sister at a very young age. So part of Karena's whole thing is that she is very childish, and so she was a character that at times did annoy me. But when I really thought about it, I was she's childish because she doesn't that's her mental state. That's where she's been stuck for her entire life, and that's just kind of how she is as a result of the situation, because that's going to mess with how someone develops mentally, basically. And Volume 1 doesn't shy away from just showing you how that Spearhead Squadron, gets whittled down over the course of the volume to the point where there's only 5 out of I think 24 of them remaining by the end of the final act. So it really just shows you that attrition and that violence. And I think the anime does a really good job of this, because whereas the novel doesn't get into the characterization of a lot of the more minor members of Spearhead, the anime does kind of I think after the anime, I think every member of Spearhead Squadron actually has a name, and you do get to see minor interactions between some of them. You do get to see them play around and joke around with each other, but then you also have to see them die on the battlefield in horrible ways and be oh wow, that's actually terrible. And it just really captures that kind of reality, that cold reality of the enemy they're facing, as well as the situation that they're stuck in. And it also showcases, I have here in my notes as well, that the violence of war is often not paid by the people that start the war, but by those who are basically forced to deal with the response, because the Empire of Jihad is basically the country that created the Legion that would then send them out. But the thing is that the Empire gets overthrown after the Legion gets sent out. So the Legion are just out here ravaging the world and driving humanity to extinction. And as punishment for what this country did, because this country, the Republic of Semenoya is very monoracial for the most part, aside from people who had immigrated from other countries. So they basically saw the Empire of Jihad do this, and they were like, okay, well, all the people who aren't Alba are to blame for this. So we're gonna put you in the 86th district and force you to fight, basically, because this is your fault. So they basically engage in this sort of collective punishment against people who had no sort of like involvement with what the Empire did, and the fact that the Empire is gone now. Although they don't really know that, because once the Legion went up, they took off so much territory and countries were cut off from each other, basically. And another thing is that it just does a really good does a really good job of showcasing that violence. I don't know. It's just one of the things that I think is really touching about the series and really realistic is just how brutal the war is, and seeing that firsthand. Okay, so another really good thing that this series does is it doesn't shy away from how stupid and violent discrimination is and can be. And I feel like I don't see a lot of other anime, light novels, and manga do this to the same degree or do it as well as 86 does. And, you know, this really does manifest in the fact that the Republic, the way they structured, the way they treat the 86, it's completely irrational. And it's one of those things where, so for example, they basically send the 86 out to fight the Legion, but, you know, when the 86 are killed, because they're not considered human, they don't, you know, let them go collect their dead. They don't bother to collect the dead of the 86. And the Republic, based on like wreckages of the Legion, basically had determined that, like, you know, because the Legion have this core processor that's kind of based on like large mammals, basically, and they have an issue replicating that, eventually the Legion will shut down and they won't be an issue anymore, and the war will end like that, basically. However, because of the excess of 86 that were killed in the fight against the Legion basically were able to collect those bodies and figure out how to use the human brain as a sort of substitute for the core processors that they originally had. So they create these things called black sheep that effectively have a human consciousness into them, or like a human consciousness specifically trapped in its last moments. So for example, Shin, who is an Esper, because different racial bloodlines basically have Esper abilities, if depending on, you know, their bloodline, what's inherited. So Shin's Esper ability allows him to basically hear the voices of these legions, so he can hear the black sheep screaming out, crying out in their last moments, basically. But he knows, and then by virtue of him knowing, the other 86 know that the Legion aren't shutting down. The Legion have tons of forces. They're not running out of bodies because they figured out how to copy and replicate human brains into Legion, basically. But the whole Republic basically believes that they'll get to exterminate the 86. They won't have to like face the consequences, and they'll be able to ride out the war, basically, and that the Legion will shut down, the 86 will be on, and everything will be perfect. And I've seen this critique as, oh, how could the Republic be so stupid? And to that, I would just say you are almost there. You are so close to that point, because, you know, the goal of the Republic is to survive as much as it is to exterminate the 86. And the Republic had racial stratification and issues before the war started. Like they didn't exactly treat all immigrants the best. There's a reason there weren't even that many people who were of other races in more central districts in the Republic, because of the racial issues. But basically, and that made it easy for them to basically round up the 86 and place them in one district at the start of the war. But because racism and other forms of discrimination are so irrational, this inevitably leads to the society either A, destroying itself, or being destroyed by an outside force, which is what happens to the Republic of Semenoya when the Legion launched their large-scale invasion. The Republic is basically caught with its pants down and are like, wait, we thought we were just shutting them down. We didn't realize they had like all these weapons, all these Legion everywhere, and they're basically wiped off the face of the map, essentially. Which is a really, it's very vindicating. It's something that's like, it was nice to see, I will say. And additionally, it does do a great job of showing how people who, when they're disenfranchised, will also direct the violence that they experience towards others who are also kind of in the same predicament, because there is a justification there that they can reason, but they can't strike back against the regular system because that would get them killed, or because they just don't have the power to do so. And this manifests in Anju, who is one of my favorite characters, who Anju is primarily Alba, except her eyes are just a little bit too blue is the issue. So when the war started, her and her mom, who have these bluer eyes, were basically sent to the 86th district because they have all the other traits, but they have a distant relative who was from another race. So, basically the Republic was like, yeah, no, you're going over there too. Which, that doesn't sound familiar at all. But in the 86th district, she is bullied. She is physically abused. She gets a brand on her back based on she goes through all this different trauma just because of people knowing her ancestry and because she looks like an Alba, so she's easy to lash out at. But she is unfortunately as much a victim as the rest of them in this situation, which is really sad. But it does do a really good job of showing that is also an aspect that happens at times as well. Okay, so I personally can't talk about 86 without talking about my favorite character, Lena, who in my opinion is a shining example of what it looks like when you do a savior complex well in a series. Because more often than not, savior complex characters can be really annoying, or they just don't really progress past the savior complex. But Lena is actually able to do that through her writing. Basically, at the beginning, Lena is effectively an oddball outcast amongst the Alba in the military because she dutifully does her job. She doesn't try to send the 86 into situations that will get them killed, as some other Alba do. Like, they will deliberately send squadrons to places where they know the Legion are and be like, oh yeah, whatever, or they won't even be doing their job. They'll be playing cards or laughing it up as the 86 are basically dying on the other side of the screen. But Lena does her job to try and preserve as many lives as possible because she does see these people as they are. And then also she barges into trainings and lectures and will give spiels about how the 86 are not pigs in human form, as they're called, but they're actually people. This is an anime original scene, by the way, which is another thing that the anime does really well. There are a lot of original scenes that work really well for Lena's characterization, as well as Shin and Anju and the other 86 characters in Spearhead that I really enjoy. So that's another reason to watch the anime as well. But she is basically, I believe these people are people. We shouldn't be doing this. This system is wrong. That is my justification. And she believes that she's doing something with that. However, her own internal biases and hangups do come up in the series later on, because at one point there's a member of Spearhead who is killed, and she is just profusely apologizing for the situation. She is very upset by it, but this causes another member of Spearhead to basically snap at her and remind her that, hey, you really don't even know us. You keep acting like you're our friend, but you haven't even bothered to ask us any of our real names. You've just been calling us by our call signs this entire time. You have not asked us our real names. And that kind of mental space that she had subconsciously been creating between herself and the members of Spearhead is you really don't see them as people because you didn't ask for their names. You just have been calling them Laughing Fox or Snow Witch or Undertaker or whatever their call sign is. You haven't been calling them by their real names. And this does get resolved, and Spearhead and her grow closer and closer together as a result of this. But the thing is, as I mentioned before, Spearhead gets whittled down, especially throughout the first volume. And Lena is consistently growing frustrated with the system. She's like, I'm going to figure out a way to ask for reinforcements. I'm going to figure out a way to help you guys, get better maps, something. And, eventually she's basically told by the Shin and the other members of Spearhead Squadron that actually Spearhead Squadron is the last stop on military service for an 86. It's where they send all the 86 who are basically too tough to die. Basically, they put them all in one squad. They have them go on these ridiculous missions, and then the ones that are still left after a certain amount of time, they send them on an exploration mission out into Legion territory that will basically for sure get them killed and wipe them out. And Lena is shocked and horrified by this because she's like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, I mean, surely you've noticed that no one who's in 86 is returned to the central districts at all, despite the fact that the war has gone on long enough where if anyone had lived, they would have made their way back by now. So she's like, oh, that's actually terrible. That's messed up. And basically the story progresses, and the final 5 members of Spearhead are sent on this mission that will for sure get them killed. But Lena does something on this mission because she wasn't overseeing them. Usually what happens is they just send them out, and that's kind of it. But Lena actually, through various means of manipulation, figures out a way to use the Republic's basically defense system that is built into the walls to order an artillery strike to assist Spearhead in a really bad fight against a Legion group that they got into, and basically saves the lives of the 5 Spearhead members that had survived and that were going on the exploration, basically. So she goes against protocol, saves these 86, and effectively, it basically makes herself like ostracizes herself even more, because after this she's demoted. Basically a lot of other outlooks basically see her as like, that's the crazy lady, like she literally just like hijacked our defense system to use to save like some people who aren't even human, basically. um and she is very distraught by the fact that Spearhead still has to leave, because they just keep going and there's nothing she can do after a certain point, which does give me one of my favorite scenes as well in the anime which I'm not going to say what it is, but it's one of my favorites that happens at this time. But because basically Shin had informed her that she had built a close enough relationship with Spirit Squadron, Shin had told her that, hey, the Legion are shutting down, like they're just building more and more Legion over there. She is able to then build a coalition between the other squadrons that she commands, as well as other like-minded Alba in the military, because all of like it's one of those things where it's like everybody doesn't agree with the system either. There are people like her, it's just they don't feel like they can stand up. But Lena, as someone who resisted, gets them to basically help her out, so that when the Legion's large-scale offensive does happen, while there's a lot of casualties, her and these other Alba and the 86 squadrons that she commands are able to form a defense and basically protect what's left of the Republic anyway, and save a lot of lives that way. So she is able to survive and then eventually be reunited with Spearhead to fight alongside them. And like in later volumes, she does have issues with her own role and like her own idea of herself as being almost an oppressor, but still like fighting alongside them, and just a lot of the mental complexities there. And I know a lot of people find that annoying, but I do think that she has to grapple with that, because she spent her whole life living a lie basically, and then she's been confronted with it very recently, and that's going to take time for her to undo. And I really do like that about her character. I like how she always strives forward to do the best for the 86 and to like give them their space, and to basically like make sure that there's something for them after this all ends. One of the final really good parts about 86 is how it deals with self-determination, especially for child soldiers. Because as I mentioned, a lot of the characters in this series, even Lena herself, are young adults or children, basically, or like teenagers, who have known nothing except imprisonment and war and violence, and have no sort of designs on the world outside of that. Like, they were told, hey, you were born less than human, and you're going to go fight and die in this war that we're punishing you for, and that's your purpose. And basically, when Shin and the other surviving members of Spearhead do make their way to another country, the Federacy, which is actually the country that took over for the Empire when they overthrew it, they're basically initially told, like, oh, wow, that's like when they're recounting their story, they're told, oh, that's so horrible. Like, you don't have to fight anymore. Like, don't worry, we'll protect you. But these are people, kids, teenagers who have known nothing other than violence. So they're like, yeah, no, we're gonna keep fighting. Like, that's our pride. That's like what we do. We don't know anything else. And at first, it's really off-putting for a lot of the Federacy officers and officials and soldiers, because they're like, we don't know how to feel about putting kids on the front line who have just survived so much, and we know they survived so much. Like, how do we feel about that? But they do let them make their own choice, and it becomes like a sort of pride thing, where it's like, again, fighting is all these kids have ever known. That is what they're good at. That's what they want to do. And the Federacy does allow them to do that, but it does give them off time. Whereas before, like, really didn't have off time. Like, I mean, they did have times when they weren't running missions, but they were always on base. A mission could happen at any time. Like, it's not ideal, basically. But the Federacy does give them like real off time in the city. They live with these first five anyway. Live with the president of the country, and in later volumes, other 86 who are freed after the Republic falls have the choice to continue military service, which many of them do, but they also have the choice to leave military service, which some of the ones who are more hurt or who have just seen too much choose to do anyway. And the ones that do stay are required to take classes and have off time, basically basically learn how to exist in the world outside of combat. And so a lot of them pick up like different interests and stuff, like different hobbies that, from things that they had already practiced before or things that they didn't realize they were interested in. So like, for example, Theo is a really good artist. Like, he loves to draw, so like he'll just go around the city drawing stuff. He just loves doing that. Karina loves fashion. She finds out she loves fashion, trying on cute clothes, cute things. She's a 15-year-old girl, so that's like, that's she never had the chance to dress up and like do stuff like that. So when she does, she's like, wow, I actually really like this. I think Anju took like a cooking class. So basically, like, everyone kind of gets their own thing, and they realize like, hey, there's like more to the world outside of like the fighting that we've always known, basically. And Shin initially is very lost at this, because Shin, his whole thing beforehand was trying to basically puts down his brother who had been sent off to war before him, and who he could hear his brother's voice because his brother had been turned into a legion. So after he defeats that legion, he is like, what do I do? Like, what's my purpose in life? Like, do I just die now? Like, like there's no one else to carry with me. Like, we've reached a place where we're kind of safe. But Lena gives him kind of an uplifting moment. And this is the thing I really love about their characters as well, is that Lena gives him something to fight for, and also, encourages him in the sense of like, hey, you survived, and honestly, that's enough. Like, you don't need to do anything else. Like, living is enough. And Shin basically resolves to basically take her to see the sea, because the Legion has largely cut off most of the ocean and like most of the places where people can go to the beach. So after the war is over, he wants to take her to see the ocean, to see the sea, and that basically becomes his reason for fighting and going forward, which is really cute, really lovely. And it shows that like people need to be able to have their own ability to make decisions and their own ability to get the things they want to fight for, basically. And that doesn't happen immediately. Like, initially they are like, yeah, we're just gonna fight, like that's what we do. But then as they experience more of the world and they realize it's not so terrible, they're like, actually there are other things that like I can do, and like I do actually want to live beyond this conflict and see what life has to offer. And I think that's a really beautiful aspect of the story. Okay, so those are some of the reasons I enjoyed watching and reading 86. I will admit, reading it, the action sequences can be kind of difficult just because the mechs themselves are not humanoid shaped. So the descriptor of like what's happening can be it can be a lot sometimes. And then also Asato loves to describe her weapons, the way the weapons are used, the speed of like the rockets and whatnot. So that can be a lot. But I really do enjoy the characterization and the theme. So like honestly, it's worth it to read through that, so I don't mind. And honestly, sometimes it is really cool. Like, I do like knowing the different ins and outs of different people's mechs that they have, especially since like a lot of them personalized based for their own fighting styles, which is really cool. But yeah, I mean, and then if you end up watching the anime, the soundtrack is phenomenal. It's one of the things that elevated the experience in the anime as well as the original scene, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But I hope you like this video. I hope you check out 86, and I will see you in the next one.